So it's a very useful tool. Is anyone? Was there anybody else? Yeah? Okay. Right. Well, I will thank you very much for coming for the first presentation of the day. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. It looks as if it's going to be very good. Looking forward to going down and seeing it myself. So with that, thank you very much for your time and enjoy the show.
On behalf of Diversified Communication India, I thank Stuart Dingwall for his first presentation. And this will be followed by another presentation by Janka Ramanskog from DNB. Please stay and attend the seminar. On behalf of Diversified Communication India, I welcome Mr. Janko Ramanskog. He is the Educational Application Support Manager from DNB Audio Technik, Germany. He's got the DNB headquarters is in Germany, and he has got 15 years of experience as a freelance work as an audio engineer in various fields. And also he holds a degree in media technology. And today's topic will be on directional low frequency sources and directional subwoofer arrangements, their workings, benefits and drawbacks. So I welcome Janko Ramanskog and hand over the mic to you. Please welcome Dr. Ramsey.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and a very warm welcome from me. As introduced, my name is Janko Ramsey. I work for DNB Audio Technik in education application support, although I'm not the managing director, so thank you for the upgrade. Hopefully they will give me a pay raise when I come back home. Now, sorry for being up here, otherwise I cannot get to the laptop. The topic is directional low frequency sources, and I'm pretty sure for all of you who've been working in live sound reinforcement. Are you doing that? Okay. So you've all probably used a directional subwoofer of some sort at one time or other. I think some can mute or delay speakers because there's nobody in the back anyway, so why excite the diffuse field any more than necessary. Feel free to come to the front. I always like to be a little bit closer to my guests in here, so hope I'm not scaring you or anything. Thank you very much. Thank you. And even if I did, it's still 3 meters, so you're safe. So I think we're all familiar with directional subwoofers, so we've all used them. But the thing is, what I've found is that quite often there's a lot of sort of mystery and half-truth being told about those things, how they work. And I thought it might be interesting to just take a look at how creating a cardioid subwoofer in general works, and then maybe to examine a few commonly used methods, commonly used implementations of those principles to see how they work and what the differences are, because there are differences obviously, otherwise we would have just one type of whatever arrangement and everybody would be using that. So let's get an idea of what the differences are and how that works in general, so we can walk out of here with a slightly better understanding about how the physics of this thing work. Now, first question, why would we want directivity in low frequencies or any kind of frequency range in the first place? Well, especially when it comes to low frequencies, once you have a stage and you put a PA in front of that or next to that, you might have things on stage that don't react very well to low frequencies. Instruments, big drums, upright bass, grand piano, traditional large instruments, that resonate in an unwanted way with low frequencies. And you may have another thing that reacts very unfavorably to those vibrations, which is the musician. So quite a few people don't appreciate it very much if the instruments it's starting to do something that they are not exciting in the instrument. But sometimes we need to have sound reinforcement because it's a large room, it's a large crowd, maybe it's a great outdoor classical open air. I don't know how common that is in your country, but in Europe this is all sort of all the rage. Classical open airs, take it from the sort of conservative, cool concert hall, bring it out in the park, and you have 50,000 people sometimes listening there, discovering this whole new kind of music that they never would be going to in a traditional concert hall because they feel all like suit and tie. So this is what happens, and in those situations you run into the problem of having to produce amplification for the low frequencies, but at the same time having to take care about feedback and about the musicians which are sensitive to these vibrations. You also might have the problem with neighbors. So if you can take a stage and rotate it away from a residential area, and if you could rotate away pretty much all of the sound with it, not just the mid and high frequencies, which are more easily made directional, but also the low frequency content, you might be able to play longer or louder or at all in the first place, because the community gives you the permission to do that festival once again. And indoors it's a similar thing, so if you can manage to not hit the back wall behind the stage with low frequency energy, you get a much clearer sound to the front, you get a quieter stage, because not everybody appreciates, apart from some rock stars maybe, the stage to be, you know, booming with bass, because they're very close to those subwoofers, and the musicians can finally decide just how much bass they would like to have in their monitors for themselves, and it's not in the hands of the front of house engineer. It doesn't end up in a fight, monitors against front of house. So it has lots of benefits to be directional. Let's see just how directional a single speaker can be. This is a so-called isobar plot of a 15-inch driver. Now, how do we read this? You may be familiar with polar plots, where you have one plot per frequency. So that means if you want to get the whole picture across a wide range of frequencies, you have to look at a page or two or three of plots. You can do that, but it's kind of tiring to do that. And I'm a lazy person, so I'm very thankful that somebody came up with this. You have all the frequencies down here on the x-axis, and we have angles on the y-axis. So how do we get this plot? Well, we put a microphone directly in front of the loudspeaker, we measure its frequency response, that gives us sort of the reference level for all frequencies, and then we rotate the microphone or the box out of the main axis, and every 5 degrees or 10 degrees, whatever increment we desire, we measure again, and as soon as the level has dropped by 6 dB for one frequency, we change the color from white to light gray. And if we do that for all the frequencies, we can also do that 2 times to find not only the minus 6 dB point, but also the minus 12 dB point. As soon as we do that, we get sort of those lines of transition. So for 4 kilohertz, for example, this is the angle off axis where the level has dropped by 6 dB in comparison to the level on axis. And the line that we get that separates the white from the light gray, this is our isobar. As in Greek, iso, equal, bar, pressure, so this is our line of equal sound pressure. And since the whole industry basically has come to the convention of specifying the minus 6 dB angle, this is why we take 6 dB separations in terms of level. So this is how we can see the whole picture in terms of directivity of a driver, a box, whatever. And this is of a 15-inch driver, and we can see, well, obviously for lower frequencies, at least when we look at the range of plus minus 60 or 120 degrees in total, it doesn't even seem to drop by 6 dB if we wander outside of the main axis by 60 degrees. So you clearly see it's pretty much omnidirectional down here, and once you cross into the mid and high range, it becomes directional all of a sudden. And this even works. It even seems to become more directional the higher the frequency goes. So seemingly there's some relationship between the wavelength of a frequency and the size of the sound source. And that's exactly what we can use, because there is a sort of rule of thumb relationship that is very useful, which is that as soon as the wavelength of a frequency that we're looking at is the same as the diameter of our sound source, in this case 15 inches is 38 centimeters, this is the same as the wavelength of about 900 hertz here. As soon as we reach that frequency, we will find with every box imaginable that at this frequency it will have roughly plus minus 45 or 90 degrees of total dispersion regarding its minus 6 dB angle. And we know immediately if we go higher in frequency, the coverage can be more narrow. If we go lower in frequency, the coverage will be more wide. This is just what happens with a single source. Is it loud enough for you with all the noise coming from the outside? Okay. Some meters left. Okay. So if you need it turned up or down, just let me know. I'm going to do that for you. So this is our rule of thumb. So we know as soon as we have the size equivalent to the wavelength, we have our 90 degree angle. This is the one for the 15-inch driver. The problem is if you take a look at our typical subwoofer, and this drawing here basically shows the front of that box as it happens, but it could be any other 18-inch direct radiating subwoofer, doesn't matter. And it's 2 scale with a wavelength of 100 hertz. So this is 3.4 meters, this is 58 centimeters. I don't think the size of this box even comes close to the wavelength of that frequency. And 100 hertz is rather the more or less the highest frequency that the sub will typically put out. So our problem becomes really apparent when we look at 50 hertz, because that is more than 10 times the size of this box. So I don't really think this box will be very directional all by itself at 50 hertz, or even at 100 hertz for that matter, because the sound just diffracts around it. There's no way this can control the sound. Because I'm a curious person, I said, well, I know that from the literature, I've been to the university, but just how unidirectional is it? So I took out a box like that in our parking lot at the company, because we usually do the low frequency measurements in the parking lot. That's the only space big enough. We don't have an anechoic room that's 40 by 40 meters, unfortunately. Maybe in the future. And what I did is I measured the frequency response in the front and in the rear. I put the microphone 6 meters away on both sides, and I used the same drive level, and I measured the frequency response. So this is the level on the front alone, and this is the comparison of front to rear level. And you can see, hey, there actually is some sort of directivity, just very little. So there's a difference in level of maybe 2.5, 3 dB at 50 hertz from front to back, and of about, that's 1 dB lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 6 dB at 100 hertz. But we all know if we use such a thing and we walk around it, the only thing that happens behind it, it gets a little bit duller. This is this difference versus that difference. So it's not really gone. It's just a little bit duller, but it's still boomy. So that doesn't help us. So I thought, hey, let's take two. Let's make the source bigger. So I put a second one on top. Unfortunately, the only thing that happened was that it followed the literature, because the literature says if you double your subwoofer stack, if you take 2 instead of 1, you get a level increase of 6 dB. And that's exactly what happened. So this is the comparison of the front level, 1 versus 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dB more. And in the rear end, the exact same thing happened, but the relationship didn't change. Pity. So what the hell, I took a third one. And the same thing happened. Literature says from 1 to 3, it's an increase in level of 9.5 dB. That's exactly what happened there and there for both sides. So we're just piling them up. It's logical because I piled them up in the vertical, but I couldn't make it more directional. So that just serves to prove, okay, theory is right, physics is still right. So how do we make it directional? Well, in order to do that, we should be looking at the sort of basic principle of a cardioid array, because what we use is rather not size, because to use size becomes very difficult. You need a huge wall of subwoofers, and for a huge open-air concert you might be able to do that. For in here, well, we can do that, but then we have to put the stage in another room because the whole front of the room is covered, so logically that doesn't work. How it works is it doesn't use size, but it uses interference. Interference from 2 sound sources. We have 2 boxes here, not one, and they're physically separated. And one happens to be facing towards the front, and the other one happens to be facing towards the rear. And for a certain frequency, this physical separation equals 1/4 of the wavelength. Only for one frequency, but there will be one where this is true. And to understand how that works, maybe we first go slowly through the first cycle. You see this blue dot? This is going to symbolify the in and outward movement of the cone of the front subwoofer. So moving out, it creates a compression. Moving in, it creates a rarefaction. So instead of going back and fro, it will go up and down. But hopefully you will understand. And we just take a look at how the sound, the pressure waves look like, which in the end tend to be sound, that are spreading both in that direction and in that direction from the box. Because we just saw it's pretty much omnidirectional, very little difference in level. So we start at time 0 and we progress in quarters of a cycle, just to make this easier. I wanted to do a movie, but I was too lazy until this day to really make a movie out of this, so sorry for that. So after 1/4 of a cycle, the cone has reached its maximum outward excursion, maximum positive excursion, and it's created the maximum possible compression right here in front of the box. And this compression is sort of pushing the zone of nominal pressure away from the front of the loudspeaker. And when we go to half of a cycle, the cone is returned to its nominal position. 3/4 of a cycle, it's producing its maximum inward excursion, so creating a rarefaction at the location of the loudspeaker. And when the full cycle is completed, it returns to the nominal position. And you could see how the peaks and dips are moving away. The peaks and dips in pressure were moving away from the box. So this is how you could envision the side view, the cutaway just in this plane of the sound being produced. Do we all know how to read this plot? No? Okay. So up to now this was just sort of the explanation of how to read this plot. Now we turn on both loudspeakers, and for the moment, since we want to approach step by step how this cardioid thing works, we just hook them up in parallel, so both are getting the same signal. And you see there's 2 dots now, so both are active, and after 1/4 of a cycle, both have extended to the maximum excursion, they come back, maximum rarefaction, nominal, after 1 full cycle. So you see, they have an offset, but since we picked the wavelength that we are showing here, that is the one what is the job description of that box? So what is, in very general, non-scientific terms, the algorithm, the block diagram? Well, step 1 is shut up. Literally. Yeah, so this guy has to wait until the sound from that guy has reached around the boxes and come here, because only then there is actually something